Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm going to take a break from doing football videos since it's the off season, and I want to do my top 50 favorite movies of all time. I'm going to break these videos up into parts. Uh, yeah, I've been wanting to do this video for a long time, and so yeah, I finally got a list and was able to get everything down and made sure I didn't miss any movies. And yeah, so this list is really my personal taste. It's not so much has nothing to do with box office or whether the critics or the masses liked it or what everybody else's list would be. This is just my personal taste of movies that at any moment I can get some popcorn like this and just sit down and watch it. Whereas the other movies, I kind of have to be in the mood for. So, before I get into my list, I have a bigger list of honorable mentions that I'm just going to read through because I think that they are worthy of mentioning. So I'm just going to read those because I know maybe some people will be, well, why didn't you put this on your list? What about this movie? What about that movie? So, that's why I made the honorable mentions. So I can show you those that are also my favorites that didn't make the list. And then I'll get into my first portion here. We're going to start with the 60s and early 70s, and then in my next video we'll continue on with the 70s. Probably up to about 75, because I have to do these in parts. So yeah, let's start with my honorable mentions list. Now I'm sure most of you will probably have these movies on your favorite list. I know a lot of people will. So here we go. Honorable mentions from 1957 to 1977. We're going to start with The Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, From Russia with Love, A Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which that's a big one I'm sure will be on a lot of people's list. You Only Live Twice, Bonnie and Clyde, The Producers, Easy Rider, Bullet, Midnight Cowboy, A Clockwork Orange, that's another big one I'm sure is on a lot of people's list. Klute, The Panic in Needle Park, Godfathers 1 and 2, another big one there. THX 1138, Little Big Man, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, The French Connection, The Exorcist, High Plains Drifter, Mean Streets, American Graffiti, The Conversation, Nashville, Chinatown, Black Christmas, The Longest Yard, the original Longest Yard, Scarecrow with Gene Hackman and Al Pacino, Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon, also Pacino films, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, The Message, also known as Muhammad Messenger of God, the Mustafa Akkad film. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, big film right there, Jack Nicholson, Oscar award-winning film there. Carrie, The Outlaw Josie Wales, and The Gauntlet, two Clint Eastwood flicks there at the bottom. So let's go ahead and look at my list, starting with the 60s. We're going to start with right at 1960 with Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Now, this is obviously one of the greatest horror films ever made, and a lot of people think was kind of the first slasher film, or at least it inspired, obviously, a lot of filmmakers like John Carpenter with Halloween later on, which I think, Halloween is like the firstborn son of Psycho. Psycho is the godfather, and then Halloween would be the firstborn crown prince of horror films, even though I prefer Halloween over Psycho, but Psycho was, it's the original one. And you got Alfred Hitchcock, and you got Jamie Lee Curtis's mama with Janet Leigh there in her bra, which was considered very risque for the times, introducing Janet Leigh and her boyfriend there, Sam Loomis, or played by John Gavin, having them, sort of post-coitus in a sleazeball hotel room. And so that sort of, suggestion that they had just had sex was, that was a big deal, even for just for movies. Obviously, you couldn't do that in TV, but for movies, that was a big deal. And of course, the shower scene, and I just love everything about Psycho. Just the way it's shot, the locations, the actors, the characters. Tony Perkins really stole the show. He was brilliant, and the music, of course, by Bernard Herrmann. Can't forget about that. And I just love it, and I think it's it did a lot of firsts, like I mentioned about Janet Leigh being in her bra, and that sort of thing. And then also it was set in just regular America, contemporary America, rather than before horror movies, it was always like Transylvania and Gothic castles and laboratories, and it was sort of, you have to kind of go out. Whereas this is it was in Phoenix, it's in America, so you can relate to it more, and it was set in just regular everyday America, just 1960. Yeah, I just love it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's the best, one of the best. It's Psycho and Halloween, The Exorcist. Those are like the best horror films ever, and this is definitely the probably one of the top of the list. So love it very much. One of my favorites of all time. And so yeah, now we're gonna go on to 1962 and go with Dr. No, the very first James Bond film, starring Sean Connery, of course, directed by Terrence Young. Great score by John Barry. I think Monty Norman gets the credit for the theme, but John Barry obviously did the music, and great cinematography by Ted Moore. And I believe this one was edited by Peter Hunt, or at least I know Peter Hunt was the editor on the following ones, and then he directed Majesty's Secret Service. But yeah, this was great. I love Dr. No. I love everything about it. I love the Jamaican setting and the way it's shot. So beautiful locations in Jamaica. And I love the story and the characters and the villain, Dr. No, and all the actors are great. Ursula Andress is the first Bond girl, and I love the way the story builds up, and there's it's just great. It's such a great adventure film, and also one of its first. Not only was it the first Bond film, but it was also you had a lot of wannabe secret agent films after this. A lot of copycats after this. This was sort of the first type of secret agent film of its kind, and then you kind of like with Dirty Harry, you had like a lot of wannabe Dirty Harrys and cop films after that. So this was one of the first, and it's the first Bond film. And yeah, Sean Connery, of course, just awesome, and he really owns the role. And it was just I mean, I just love how it's filmed. I mean, I love the Jamaica, and it's such a beautiful location, and yeah, it's just everything about it, just from top to bottom, music, directing, actors, just classic early 60s Sean Connery era James Bond, and definitely one of my favorite Bond movies of all time, and obviously one of my favorites with Sean Connery era, in the Sean Connery era. So, and yeah, I mentioned John Barry, so my next movie here has John Barry as the composer, and that movie is Zulu. Directed by Stanley. Was this Stanley Baker? Did he star in it as well? And Richard Burton. Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable, epic film. I believe this is Ridley Scott's, one of his favorite films. And and this was also the first feature film, I believe, of Michael Caine. You see a young Michael Caine there in the middle, and I just love it. Again, another beautifully shot film in the Serengetis of South Africa, and just an amazing location. And I just love the action. It's almost like a Western. I always thought of it as like a Western, only with Brits, redcoats, and in Africa. But it has like a Western feel to it with the shootouts and everything. But it just has such great, I love the Zulu warriors with their chanting, and the tension before the battles, and when they ambush the Rorik's Drift, the little base or fort that they're at. And it's just, I mean, just it has such a beautiful scale, and just of that terrain in Africa, and the mountains, and the Zulu warriors over the hill, and it's just really just an epic film, and just beautifully shot, great actors, of course, and great score by John Barry again. And yeah, it's just one of my favorites. Like I said, Ridley Scott's one of his favorite movies of all time. I think it influenced him a little bit on Gladiator, because I know he used some of the sound effects from from the Zulus in Gladiator, which is funny. So yeah, Zulu, one of my favorites, great epic film. And so we're going to go back to Mr. Bond and stay in 1964 and with John Barry as the composer and go to Goldfinger. Now this is probably one of my favorite James Bond films of all time, and it's my number one favorite for Sean Connery. This is my favorite Sean Connery era Bond film. Now I know most people say From Russia with Love, and I love that one too, and I mentioned it in my, as you saw on my honorable mentions list. But it's just this one kind of has the staples of a Bond film that would stay throughout the series with all the actors, with the Q Lab and the Aston Martin car and the gadgets and everything like that. It's just such a amazing, again, that 60s awesome Sean Connery era Bond, James Bond. And this one's definitely my favorite. It's the first James Bond film that goes to America. They go to the Kentucky Derby, and then they go to Miami Beach, and I think they go to Switzerland, and then of course England as well. And I just love the locations, memorable villains with Goldfinger and Oddjob. I think Oddjob and Jaws are the most recognizable Bond villains. So you got those guys and great actors. Pussy Galore, of course, that's another Bond staple, having the sexual innuendo name of the girl. And I just love the adventure of it. I love how he travels all, throughout the world pretty much, and just a great movie, and it has everything in a James Bond film you want, and that's why it's my favorite Sean Connery era Bond film, and one of my favorites of all time in the whole series. So great movie, one of my favorites of all time. So now we're going to move on to the 70s. We're going to jump a little bit, and we're going to go to another action hero with the rough, gruff Clint Eastwood. And one of my favorite westerns of all time, Two Mules for Sister Sarah, directed by Don Siegel. And great score, of course, by Ennio Morricone, who did the Man with No Name trilogies and so many great epic western and other films that he scored. I think this is one of Ennio Morricone's best scored movies. I love it. It's very underrated. And, Clint Eastwood, of course, he has all these amazing epic westerns with the spaghetti westerns that I mentioned, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and then the ones that Clint directed himself, like The Outlaw Josie Wales and The Unforgiven and High Plains Drifter. But this one kind of gets overlooked a little bit. I really love Two Mules for Sister Sarah. This is really an underrated Clint western that kind of gets overlooked a little bit. I think it just has a great story. It's set in Mexico, not too far from me because I live in El Paso, Texas, so it's kind of close to home. And it's beautifully shot. I love the characters. I really love Clint and Shirley MacLaine as a duo. And even though I think Shirley was kind of being a diva, she had some issues with Don Siegel and Clint a little bit, but you can never tell because they just matched perfectly, and they did such a great job. They really made a great pair in this movie. I love the climactic, battle between the French and the Mexican army during that time. And it's got a great story, the way the story develops, and great location, and everything, music, the way it's shot, and a little bit of humor in the movie too. There's some funny moments, and it's just great. I love it. It's classic Clint, and Shirley MacLaine does a great job too, and I just love it. It's one of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies of all time, and one of my favorite westerns as well. So it's just a great movie. So I'm going to end it here because I don't have enough time. I only have 15 minutes on this recorder thing that I have. So this is my first little chunk of movies, and we'll move on to the rest of the 70s. Lots of Clint Eastwood movies coming up, you'll see, and a lot of other great movies coming up on my next video. We'll do the rest of the 70s, and so let me know what you think, and if you like these movies too, or if you've seen them. If you haven't seen them, I highly recommend you see these movies. And so stay tuned for my next film, my next group of films, which would be from, I think, probably like 1971 to about 1975. So that'll be my next little chunk of films to talk about on my list. So hope you liked it, and peace out.